Jai Hind everyone. Every year or so, a new threat comes up from China or the Chinese puppet Pakistan. And this threat always uses Brahmaputra as the commodity to dominate India. Recently, again, a puppet of the Chinese Communist Party, Victor Gao, made a statement that if India stop Pakistan's water, China will stop India's water. So, on one hand, they have been giving this statement upon the humanitarian grounds. They have been citing that if India continues to suspend the Indus Water Treaty, that will be a humanitarian issue. Okay, and it will be severely dealt, and China in response will end up stopping the tap for India. Now, how true is this? This question has been discussed various times. Okay, even though the Indian officials have made it very clear that if China thinks they own the rivers, then India owns the control over Malacca Strait, which is essentially important for the Chinese trade. But leaving behind the Malacca Strait angle, in this session, I'll be primarily emphasizing upon the question, can China stop water flow to India? Is China in a dominating position to stop this water flow? Okay. And along with this angle, I'll also discuss the Malacca Strait angle. Okay. So, first and foremost, China has always been making claims that we are the ones dominating the flow of Brahmaputra and Satluj. Now, can China weaponize its upstream position on the Brahmaputra and the Satluj River? So, in this session, we will analyze this entire situation through technical, hydrological, and diplomatic angles. And we will also understand that what all are India's counter leverages or India's response to this Chinese threat. So, first and foremost, starting off with this discussion, okay, the two rivers in discussion are Brahmaputra, called the Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet, and Satluj. Okay, even though both of these rivers they originate in China or the Chinese controlled territory, but essentially they do not dominate the entire flow. Okay, now we are focusing upon these two rivers because they represent different challenges. Brahmaputra is a massive rain-fed river, while Satluj is smaller and more easily regulated. Both of these rivers originate in China, giving China a geographical leverage. But how real is this leverage? Okay. Now, when we see the effects of this, Brahmaputra is vital for India's northeast region, okay, and governs the agriculture, hydropower, and the devastating annual floods. On the other hand, Satluj is critical for Punjab's agriculture and the broader Indus Basin water network. Okay. Now, when we start off with this discussion, first and foremost, let us take an example of let us take Satluj and Indus in discussion. Now, they originate from glaciers near the Mount Kailash, Mansarovar, the Rakshastal region in the Tibet. Okay. Now, if we see the Chinese contribution to this, it is around 10 to 15% in case of Indus and around 20% in case of Satluj. Rest contribution is made by India only. Okay, so the remaining contribution is through Indian tributaries, okay, and majorly the Indian monsoon. Okay, so while China has a barrage at the Zada Gorge, they are not the primary source of these. Okay, now moving ahead and take Brahmaputra. Okay, which begins as the Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet's Angzi Glacier. Okay, now Brahmaputra begins in the Chinese controlled Tibet region. Okay, and China's contribution is around 22 to 35%. Okay, majorly due to the glacial melts plus limited rainfall. On the other hand, India's contribution to this is around 39% to 70% due to the monsoon rainfall and major tributaries like the Subansiri, Lohit and Dibang. Okay. Now, previously, as per the monsoon statistics, this contribution has also risen up to 80%. Okay. Now, if we have a check at the flow comparison. So, at the Indo-Chinese border, around Tooting, okay, the flow is 2000 to 3000 cubic meter per second. In Assam, on the other hand, in the monsoon season, it swells to 15,000 to 20,000 cubic meter per second. Okay, so China has to understand one thing: Brahmaputra grows in India, it does not shrink in India. Okay, next is China's technical capabilities and the infrastructure. Okay, so we need to understand that this is the game changer. Brahmaputra is a rain-fed river. The water China holds upstream is very less in comparison to what enters into India through monsoons and the seven sister tributaries. If China stopped the flow, it might actually reduce the floods that are happening in Assam almost every year during monsoon. Okay, so China has to understand that they would only be contributing to the betterment. Okay, so that is the silver lining here, because India generates the bulk of the water downstream. Okay, now what are the technical capabilities on Satluj? Okay, Zada Gorge can regulate flow. Okay, on Indus, dams on the Sangay Zangpur near the Damchok region. Okay, on Brahmaputra, okay, massive project. Okay, so they have been proposing the Great Bend Dam. Okay, with 60 gigawatt capacity. The Yarlung Zangpo lower reaches hydropower project. Okay, and they are estimatingly investing somewhere around $167 billion to build 5 cascade power stations. Now, what all are the technical capabilities? It can regulate flow, store, release, or divert, can withhold hydrological data, which they have been doing ever since 2022. Okay, it all started during the Doklam, and they have been withholding the hydrological data. Okay, so if we have to understand this from a pure engineering standpoint, China has the infrastructure. They can slower the rate of water. Okay, they can hold it back during the dry months, or they can release in larger quantities. But infrastructure is just one thing. Okay, using it effectively without consequences is an entirely different ball game. Okay, now if we have to understand all of this due to with the historical precedents, okay, in past actions we have seen in 2004, 2016, as well as in 2020. Okay, in 2020, recently China had blocked the Galwan River, the Indus tributary. Okay. Now, what are the associated risks of these Chinese dams? Okay. First is the waterborne fears. Now, controlled releases could amplify Assam floods instead of inducing drought in that region. Okay. If we talk about the dry season blackmail, now reduced flow pre-monsoon will affect agriculture as well as the navigation. Okay. Third is the seismic risk. Now Tibet is earthquake prone. A dam which would breach something that could cause catastrophes around the region. Okay. And it could definitely have catastrophic flash floods downstream. Okay. So China has previously shown us that it can block tributaries. Galwan and Shiaku have already proven that. But these were small streams. Doing the same on main Brahmaputra river carries massive seismic and ecological risks. And this is something that if China plans to do so, it can backfire Chinese project itself. Okay. Now the ultimate limitation why China cannot do so. Now, China only controls the upper plateau region, which is very cold, arid, that is cold deserts. Okay. The vast flow in India comes from the low latitude tropical monsoon rains. Okay. Now, in this situation, Bhutan and India's tributaries, they are contributing around 80% of total Brahmaputra flow after it leaves Tibet. Okay. Now, diverting the full flow would cause massive siltation in the dams, and the terrain is fragile. Altering the river drastically risk ecological collapse inside the Tibet also. Okay, so herein we can see that if we simply put, China cannot turn off the tap because India's own tap, which is the monsoon, is far bigger from these Chinese accumulation of water. You cannot stop a river that is fundamentally fueled by the Indian rainfall and the massive downstream tributaries. Okay, so total stoppage to this water flow is physically impossible. Okay. Next, what are the diplomatic limitations? Now, China has no binding water sharing treaty with India. However, they have got some memorandums of understanding for data sharing on Brahmaputra, which last expired on 23 on Brahmaputra and 2020 for Satluj. Okay. China has not renewed these MOUs and they have been withholding critical flood data with them. Okay. Moreover, under the Helsinki rules and the UN Water Courses Convention, states are prohibited from causing significant harm to the downstream nations. If China drastically alters the flow, it could attract international backlash and would impact Bangladesh. Okay. Now, this becomes a greater leverage point for India. Okay. Chinese have been heavily investing into Bangladesh and they are planning to use Bangladesh against India. So they cannot intentionally create a situation of drought in Bangladesh just as to destabilize India. Okay, so legally China is not bound by any bilateral treaty, but they are bound by the optics and the international norms. Now, weaponizing water would isolate China diplomatically and it would especially anger Bangladesh that has been a forthcoming economic slave of China. Okay, now when we talk about the geopolitical perspectives, okay, so we must also understand that what all are the geopolitical perspectives here. Okay, so before moving it into, okay, we must also understand that how this geopolitical angle has been into force. Okay, now India has recently suspended the Indus Water Treaty with Pakistan after the Pahalgam attacks. Okay, now China has been putting up veiled threats. Okay, now they have hinted at retaliating on the Brahmaputra if India pushes upstream projects. Now, if you understand the Pakistani hypocrisy factor, China has built massive dams on the Indus upstream of Pakistan, but Pakistan has stayed silent. Okay, so this should have been a greater cause of concern for Pakistan. Okay, but when India builds small hydropower projects on its side, Pakistan screams water terrorism. Okay. Now, this pattern, it clearly shows that major powers prioritize national alliances over the downstream rights of the people. Pakistan has been criticizing India because it is geopolitically safer for them. They do not criticize China because China is their lifeline. CPEC, arms deal, diplomatic cover. So, in between China and Pakistan, it is not about water. It is about the alliances they have formed. Okay. Now, along with this, if we talk about the strategic responses and preparedness, recently the Assam CM and the Indian officials have publicly downplayed the threat and they have stated that China's leverage is minimal. Okay. India has formally taken up the matter diplomatically with China via the expert level mechanisms. And if we talk about the India's countermeasures, so first is the domestic project. India is expediting its own hydropower project, that is the Upper Siang project in Arunachal. Data independence, India is developing its own hydrological monitoring systems to predict floods without relying on the Chinese data. And third, the regional diplomacy. They have been engaging with Nepal and Bhutan, who are also upstream for some Indian rivers to ensure cooperation. Okay. And as rightly it has been said, we might not even be invoking Malacca Strait. Even before that, China would have to surrender. Okay. Now, the next angle, if we see, is the Malacca dilemma. Okay, the Malacca dilemma. Okay, now Strait of Malacca is a narrow choke point. Okay, which is around 2.8 kilometer wide. Now, 75 to 80% of the Chinese imports, oil imports, and 2/3 of the total trade transmit is through this strait. Okay. Now, we have got three angles to dominate this region. Okay, the geographical advantages that we have. Okay, the Andaman and Nicobar Island is just 90 nautical miles from Malacca. The Great Nicobar Island is just 40 nautical miles from the international shipping channel. Okay, so India can now check, track, and potentially influence the most vital economic lifeline of China. Moreover, the Great Nicobar project that is coming up, wherein India is planning to invest up to 80,000 crores. Okay, it will ensure deep water transshipment port plus international airport plus surveillance radar. Okay. India has been expanding the capabilities of INS Baz to monitor the Chinese naval and commercial movements in the region. Clear? So, if China says that they have leverage of upstream on Brahmaputra and Satluj, okay, then we have proximity to Malaka. Okay. If China thinks that they can regulate or reduce water flow, then we are in the position to monitor 80% of Chinese imports. Okay. If China thinks that they can withhold the data, then don't worry, we are building our own surveillance and rapid response capabilities. Clear? So this is a very, very counter perspective that India holds against China. So even if China is on upstream of our rivers, we are having considerable control over the Chinese lifelines. Okay. Now, if we talk about the real risk versus the real impact, so worst case scenarios, if we discuss about the worst case scenarios, okay, so we must separate fear from the facts. China could cause local disruptions near the border in winters, but for majority of the year, India's own rain and tributaries are completely overwhelming whatever China has been holding back. Okay. Plus, India's domestic dams and monitoring systems are building resilience for India against China. Okay. So, when we have to conclude over these things, okay, we must understand that China no doubt has leverage, okay, infrastructure plus data withholding. But China cannot fully stop the flow of either Brahmaputra or Satluj. Okay. China can cause partial disruptions as a possible geopolitical tool, but that also carries a severe diplomatic, environmental, and strategic risk. Okay. So China's water leverage is countered by India's maritime leverage over the Malacca Strait. Okay. So in this situation, there are various recommendations for India. Okay. India has to strengthen its monitoring. They have to accelerate their domestic hydropower production. Okay. And India must always pursue multilateral diplomacy. Okay. We can understand that water security is national security in Himalayas. And India must prepare for the worst situation, but remain assured that geography and India's strategic position will work in India's favor. Okay. So we must understand this, that water is a weapon, but it is not equivalent to a nuclear weapon. China is in a position wherein they can just point a gun at us, okay, but the bullet, in case they fire, will largely miss India. Okay. And if China pushes itself too hard, okay, then we have got our dominance over the Malacca Strait. Clear? So, I hope all of you would have understood that what it really means for India as well as for China. I hope you have understood everything, and please do let me know your doubts also in the comment section. Also, please do join me on my Telegram channel. The channel has been named as Defense Decoded. Okay. And the link to this channel is Sharad_StudyIQ. Okay. On this channel, you can get all the annotated PDFs, okay, of my Smart NCRT series. In this Smart NCRT series, I am covering all NCRTs from class 6 to 12th for Indian polity. Okay. And I have been taking this session daily at 3 p.m. So do join me if you want to build a strong foundation of Indian polity for your upcoming exams. Clear? So do join me on the Telegram channel for all updates regarding the exams, and I'll see you all in the next session. Jai Hind.